All educational games are boring, right? Well, this is no longer true, as we're about to explain in Cytosis, a cell biology board game review.
Cytosis, a cell biology board game, which I'm just going to call Cytosis from now on, and I think the other two of us are going to join me in that. We're just going to call it Cytosis, comes from the folk at Genius Games, who we do have to thank for providing us with a review copy. Now, the goal of Genius Games is to produce educational games that are actually fun and that will appeal to modern board game audiences. And honestly, I'll say right here, they nailed it with Cytosis.
Cytosis was designed by John Cuvio and features additional art by Toms Bogus. It plays 2 to 5 players with games taking under 2 hours, most of ours being close to 1.5 hours, except for our first couple of plays.
So Genius Games lists this game as being ages 10 plus, which seems like a good fit, as that's around the age you start taking and learning about cells in school, although that may vary by district.
Yeah, we specifically requested this game because Genevieve, our daughter, was currently taking cell biology at the time. Though that was plant cells and this is animal cells, but there's a lot of overlap there.
Cytosis is a worker placement game that's located inside a human cell. You use your workers to collect resources like mRNA, ATP, lipids, and carbohydrates, and then you use them to produce enzymes, proteins, steroids, receptors, and more. The enzymes are easy to make. Proteins and steroids require a multi-step process to produce, which will have you using transport discs to move your resource cubes around the various parts of the cell.
Physically, this is all represented on the board, which is a giant, very colorful cell with very obvious worker placement spots and clear iconography. Resources are represented by different colored cubes and ATP, or energy. The currency of the game is represented by cardboard tokens. Workers are wooden vials, and card quality is excellent. Except for looking like a potentially dry educational game, we have no complaints component-wise. On the educational side, the game also comes with a description of actual cell functions and how they are represented in the game, a sort of teacher's guide.
So you start Cytosis by laying out the board. One side's used for 2 players. It has less worker placement spots on it. The other is for all player counts. Players collect the components in their color and keep a number of worker flasks based on the player count. A set of goal cards is drawn and displayed at the top of the board, and each player is dealt 2 cell component cards. They choose one to keep. Actually, it might be 3 and you keep 2. Sorry, I might be a little off on that one. Not too important right now. The remaining cell cards are placed next to the board, and the 4-card market at the bottom of the board is filled. An event deck is created, and each player gets some starting ATP based on the player order.
On your turn, you're going to use one of your worker flasks to claim a spot on the board and take the associated action. These actions include collecting resources, purchasing new cell component cards, completing cell component cards in your hand, and taking the first player marker, and also claiming a goal or 1 ATP. There's also a way to purchase an additional flask to purchase an additional flask for 1 turn, which will give you an extra action.
So collecting resources is pretty simple. You place your worker and collect the amount of resources that are shown. Some spots require you to trade one resource for another, or to trade ATP for resources, or a resource for ATP.
Now, purchasing cards is also simple. Each spot in the market shows a cost, an ATP. Pay the cost, take the card. Note the cards do not refill when purchased. You have to wait till the end of the round, and at that point, the leftmost card is actually discarded.
Taking the first player marker is simple enough. You go first next turn, but in addition to that, you get to place a goal marker on one of the available goal cards. Now, each goal card only has spots for 2 markers, and the player who claims the card first is going to get bonus points. The goals award end game points for collecting different things like protein cards, steroid receptors, specific cell cards, etc.
Well, that leaves the most complicated part of the game, and that is completing cell component cards. Some of these are simple. To complete an alcohol detoxification card, you just have to place a flask on the smooth ER and pay some energy. Enzymes are also pretty easy, as you place on the proper spot and trade in the resources shown.
Now things get interesting with hormones. These include steroids, proteins, and receptors for both. Completing one of these is a multi-step purpose, which starts by placing in one of the 2 ER spots, either smooth or rough, placing your transport disc there and placing the appropriate resources on the disc. Then you need to place another worker on the Golgi apparatus and move your disc down to that spot and add some more needed resources there. Finally, you'll have to play a worker at the plasma membrane to actually play the card, which you pay its ATP cost. Note, this doesn't all have to be done on the same turn.
And I'm thinking this is sounding way more dry than it actually plays. Okay, every cell component card you complete gives you bonus points in the form of health. Alcohol cards are only worth 1 point, but there's bonus points at the end of the game for completing the most value of alcohol cards. Enzymes are worth a small amount of health, but you get bonus points at the end for having sets of different enzymes. Hormones give you big points, but also give points to any opponents who have already built receptors of the appropriate types.
At the end of each round, everyone collects their workers. The leftmost cell card is discarded and the market is refilled. Finally, an event card is flipped up. Each of these provides a one-time bonus for one of the worker placement spots on the board, awarded to the first player who uses that spot. The game ends the round after you flip the last event card. The player with the most health wins.
And yeah, as Deanna just kind of said, this sounds a lot more complicated and dry than it actually is when you're playing on the table. Cytosis, a cell biology board game, is actually rather straightforward. Like, most actions are very clear and do one simple thing that's fully shown on the board how to do it. It's only when you get to the hormones that things get it all complicated. And honestly, if you played any engine building game before, even that's pretty straightforward.
And I'm going to disagree with the argument Sean made at the beginning that this has a very educational look to it, because to me, it didn't quite, like, it's a step up from the look of the average educational game. Like, just looking at this, you get the vibe that this is going to be actually a game of some enjoyment.
So I think the one detail people do need to remember, and perhaps reinforce during the teach in that first gameplay, is those goal cards. I know I was on the far end of the table from them, couldn't really read them easily. And since I was trying to keep track of the rest of things and learn my first time through the game, my score really suffered from not partaking in those goal cards.
Yeah, and to be fair, one of the more clever parts of this game is the way those goal cards work and how through them players will decide what they're scoring points for. You literally part way through the game are kind of like, well, I'm going to try to collect all this, or I'm going to work on that. The bonus points award for claiming these early on also kind of give you direction on what you should be doing next. You kind of give you an idea of what you should work towards and what you should be working on.
Yeah, I think in many ways, calling this an educational game is kind of doing it a disservice, as in the past, games under that sort of a title tended to be very light on the good game part. You either had an educational game or a fun game, and the more you learned from the game, the less fun the game was. Well, that's certainly changed now.
Yeah, and you were talking about the goal cards. I like the way that once you put your marker on there, you're showing everyone else at the table what you're going for too, that's and true. That leads to some strategy.
Yeah, the most important thing, obviously, for people to know of this is it's a good game. Like, this is a very solid, well play tested, great flow, very solid worker placement game with a kind of interesting engine building mechanic. There's some set collection with the enzymes, and there's area majority even with the alcohol detoxification card. So, like, this is just, it's a solid cube pushing Euro. It fully fits. It just fits that genre game really well.
And the theme is really tightly tied in. Everything makes sense. Like the science educational aspects are really tied into the game mechanics, so everything just makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You know, when we're describing it and discussing it in this way, it does sound really dry mostly because of the big words. Except you almost don't need them. Now, again, it is well tied to the theme. It's not just pasted on. They've taken it and done it well. But once you're playing the game, you can start thinking about, colored cubes and things, and it makes it easier to play the game, which also makes it easier to learn what's going on. It's that mnemonic idea where you're connecting these big words on the cards with these really actually kind of simple actions that are happening on the board.
And I got to say, we're not using the big words here. We're sticking to the ER and ATP. We're not saying adenosine triphosphate every time we say ATP. So it does kind of simplifies things a bit. And we're just talking about resources in general. But yes, the red cubes are one thing, and the yellow cubes are another, and the green cubes are another one. Yes, you definitely. I did find myself while playing this game doing the Lords of Waterdeep thing, where I'm just, hand me 2 red cubes, please. Not, can you please pass me some mRNA, which is not the red cubes. Actually, it's the black cubes. Now, another thing I did like about this game is the fact it's a bit of a point salad, because while you can focus on like doing one thing, right? You can be like, oh, this game, I'm going to collect enzymes because I get all the enzymes for having a complete set. It's worth this many points. And then if I collect a second set, I can get this, and maybe I can get 3 sets going. Or you'd be like, no, you know what? I'm just going to build protein hormone receptors. And then every time someone else makes it, I'm going to get a ton of points. Or you're like, I'm going to buy every alcohol card that comes up. Well, the thing is, that works to a point. You can kind of set a goal like that, but due to the luck of the draw and the fact there's only 4 cards in the market every turn, you won't be able to just specialize in one thing. You're forced to do other stuff. Or if you don't, you're wasting turns doing nothing. Now, that said, this game does reward a level of game mastery and knowing the deck. So you are going to have an advantage if you played the game more than a new player, or if you haven't looked through the deck to kind of see the distribution.
Yeah, that's true, because I am the kind of player that usually tries to pick a path for my victory. Not always the same one, and I love that there's multiple paths to get there, but you can't pick a path in this and stay on it. You have to be adapting to the game situation as you go, and you are going to have to spread out to be able to get your points.
So one thing to be aware of this game, it can be quite cutthroat. This is a nasty worker placement game. You will be competing for spots. Some of the options on the board are limited, very limited, only allowing 1 player to use them in a 5-player game. For example, there's 1 spot in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which is the start spot for trying to complete any steroid card. But it's also where you have to go for alcohol detoxification. So if you know you need to go to the smooth ER, you better steal a start player so that you can make sure to get there first. Because if anyone else is trying to do alcohol detoxification or produce steroids, they're going to steal the spot. Plus, when you are doing the whole building hormones thing, there's the whole thing where you're moving your transport disc. Well, there's only spots for so many discs on the board. And if you move to a spot where there's no room, the player who has the most health gets their disc back and loses all progress they've made on that hormone.
Yeah, that doesn't happen as often as I thought it would. The board feels tight, but at least in the plays we had, we weren't actually kicking each other out.
Yeah, I do find in many ways, while it's very much not what we think of as an educational, it is kind of very much what you expect in a really solid, tight Euro game, which is a staggering standout in the educational world.
Overall, I'll say it outright. This is the best educational game I played. It does a great job of being just abstract enough while still being true to the science, and it's actually quite fun. It's a very solid worker placement game and has engaging mechanics. The problem is that it is an educational game, and no matter how much we try to say it's better than it looks, it's better than it sounds, it is still kind of dry. It's kind of hard to get excited about producing proteins, and while the game works and works well, it just lacks that fun theme. And it doesn't really have any new mechanical twists or anything really different from previous games that makes it stick out, other than the fact that it's an actually fun educational game. While I enjoy Cytosis and will happily sit down and play it again, I can't see ever actually recommending this game on game night, and there's no way I'm calling up my friends for a night of pizza and Cytosis.
Though I will say our daughter, who is in 8th grade, actually really enjoyed the game, found it fun, and wanted to play again. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe this game if people would be as a solid, enjoyable midweight Euro that also teaches you about cell biology. It's a good game. It just happens to be very educational. I think, it's really, as a Euro game, it's not that much more dry than, building cheese in your local French, townships.
Now, of course, where I think this game is going to really shine is in the classroom. Though I personally don't want to figure out the logistics of playing a 5-player game with 30 students. That's up to the curriculum to figure out, or the teachers or professors to figure out. Now, this was kind of funny because I went to double check a rule this morning, and I searched online, and the first hit I found for this game was the University of Waterloo, which obviously uses the game for one of their courses. This is a game that you can learn something, though honestly, I think it's probably better as a mnemonic for remembering cell biology concepts that you originally learned in the classroom. Now, if you have tried this game and really dug it and would call up your friends for a pizza and cytosis party, there is an expansion, the Cytosis virus expansion. The expansion adds influenza, rhinovirus, and Ebola, and the ability to spend ATP to build up antibodies to combat each of these strains. It adds dice, new mechanics, additional cards, and more to Cytosis.
That actually sounds kind of interesting. And then there is actually also a plant cell game that Genius Games puts out, but we didn't find that out until later because I think our daughter would have been even more interested in that one because that is exactly what she was studying in school at the time, but I can't remember the name of that one.
Yeah, actually, the designer of this is actually a PhD student in public health with a master's in environmental and chemical engineering. So there's some smart folks making this game. So that's all we have time for tonight's class. Your homework, which is due on my desk by the start of class tomorrow, is to leave a comment on this review wherever you found it and let us know what your favorite educational game is.
And don't forget our class fundraiser where you can support your Tabletop Bellhop classmates through their Patreon. Get access to crib notes for each show, first thought, game reviews, bonus audio, and more. Show your team spirit at patreon.com/tabletopbellhop.